World Jam Global Radio. This is clarity.
Yeah, I'm finna handle that right now. Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Rest in peace, Mike Brown, Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Walter Scott, and all victims of police brutality. I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. You see my ends up, you see my ends up.
Well, it's a big good evening from me, Kervin, Julien, on Issues Today, World Jam Global Radio's dynamic talk show.
I want peace.
We've got an absolutely smashing show lined up for you today.
Don't shoot.
Alongside me and myself and my co-host, Dr. David Remay, from Kentucky, we have Hillbilly Jed. Starting the show with a brand new track by Stickman. It's a musical track entitled I Can't Breathe. They're right along the police brutality line. This one's brought to my attention by the latest to the Issues Today team, Ninjet.
You see my ends up, I don't shoot. I know justice, I know peace. Who I am, Mike Brown, Eric Garner, Trevor Martin, Walter Scott, Eric Garner. Who I am, Mike Brown, Eric Garner, Trevor Martin, Walter Scott, Eric Garner. I is what I am. I am that I am. I is what I am.
We're going to be looking at the events that have taken place around the world and looking at police brutality, corruption and politics.
Mike Brown. I can't breathe,
From the southern state of Kentucky.
I can't breathe.
Don't forget, next week, make sure you do join us as we have the team, the members from Black Lives Matters.
I don't shoot because we gonna lay.
But today, ladies and gentlemen,
I say we gonna lay on the ground because we.
as the world stood still last night and the news kept pouring in this morning, over 153 dead at the last count. 7 of the 8 suicide bombers are blowing themselves up. Quite sure we can have some thoughts and some opinions on that as we start the show.
I can't breathe. You see my hands up. I don't shoot.
But it's so great to be here with you once again on World Jam Global's radio, dynamic talk show, Issues Today. My name is Kervin, Julien, and I'd just like to welcome you to tonight's show.
World Jam Global Radio. This is clarity.
Stand my ground. You stand your ground. Don't shoot. I stand my ground.
Well, as I said, that's a brand new track by Stickman, a musical track entitled I Can't Breathe. And that one was sent to me via Ninjet. Absolutely fantastic track. Anyhow, it's time to introduce my guest to you tonight. And alongside me, regularly as ever, is my right-hand man, my co-host, and forever faithful companion, Dr. David Remay. Good evening, Dr. David.
Hello, Kervin. How are you doing?
Well, it's been raining, it's been cold, it's been a very wet and hard week for us here in the UK, but missing you, my brother.
Well, I can't complain here. We have the most beautiful skies, blue, with a few great big white whales that people call clouds, swimming across the ocean in peace and quiet. And it's a very big contradiction in terms of what is going on in our beloved city of light, Paris, where we all feel very badly about the tragedy that happened there last night on Friday the 13th as a result of some terrorist criminals who think that they can take the lives of some young people gathered in peace, enjoying art and music, into their own hands and shed their blood on the street as if they were no better than earthworms crawling forth from a bunch of old leaves. And to imagine the horror that the parents and the extended families and the friends must feel, knowing that they kissed their children goodnight, thinking they were going to a wonderful concert to hear music by an American band of all things, and to know that they're going to come home in coffins with blood and lost arms and all kinds of tragedy. It's a horrible thing. We suffered it in America on September 11, 2001. London suffered it in the subway. And of course, Madrid suffered it on a train. None of us are immune from this kind of a crime. And we have to ask ourselves, do we destroy a squid or a great big octopus by cutting off a few suction cups, by cutting off a few tentacles, or by going right for the head? And I would say that the solution is not the tentacles, nor the head, nor the suction cups. The real solution is to find a peaceful world in which the octopus can live and we can live. And the whole thing is never going to be solved. It started in 1948, and when Israel was divided, and the Arabs and Palestinians saw their country divided and given to the victims of the Holocaust. And they thought to themselves, why should we have to give our land to the European victims of the Holocaust? Why shouldn't Germany have to give Bavaria away, or Berlin away? Or why shouldn't the Russians have to give a piece of their land, or the Poles, or the Hungarians? All these people who killed Jews. Why do we, the Palestinians, have to surrender our country? Because somewhere in the Bible it said 3,000 years ago, this is given to Israel. Well, if you look in the Bible, God took it away from Israel 100 times too. So, I mean, to base it on religion and to base it on revenge for the Holocaust and to make these people pay for it, it seems unfair. And Israel is in a situation where the Arabs have agreed that Israel can exist, but you have to leave the settled and occupied territories and let us live also. And the Israelis are never, ever going to surrender the Golan Heights, and they're never, ever going to surrender the West Bank, and they're going to have apartheid. And as a result, we're going to continue having war. Now, this current war is the result of George W. Bush's criminal act with England and Spain to invade, contrary to the wishes of France and Germany and Japan and China and all the great allies that we have in the world, most of the world, to invade Iraq as a means to be reelected in 2004. As Henry Kissinger told Bob Woodward, the problem with Afghanistan is that it's not big enough to pay revenge for September 11. In other words, Bush needed a bigger war to distract from his own failure to protect the United States of America on September 11, after he had been given innumerable warnings by the NSA and CIA that we were going to be attacked by airplanes. And Karl Rove went in January 2002, and he told the Republican conference that as long as we fought this war against Afghanistan and Iraq, which they were pumping at that time, the Republicans would win the election of 2002, the congressional elections, and the presidency in 2004, because, quote unquote, the American people trust Republicans more. Now, the American people have a habit of voting against their own interest every time they vote Republican. So I am not surprised that the Republicans, who have influenced and brainwashed this uneducated mass in America, that they can support our freedom and protect us better in spite of September 11 than can Democrats. It's an absolute ridiculous, moronic statement that is undeserving of the most primitive creature that fell out of Satan's anus one can imagine. Now, let me define the difference, because our producer, Linda, wants to know the difference between ISIL and ISIS and ICE, IIS, ICE. And the difference is very simple. They're the same people. They're no different. But the nomenclature is very easy to distinguish. The problem here is that now the Republican conspiratorialist who believe President Obama, born in Honolulu, Hawaii, was born somewhere on a coffee plantation in Kenya to rabid Muslims who attended a school funded by Saudi Arabia, their big buddies, who George W. Bush kissed on the mouth, if you remember, at his ranch in Texas. A lot of activity going on there that one has to question. Anyway, and he went to Indonesia to learn to be a Muslim, and that as a Muslim, he went to a Christian church and influenced his preacher's sermons. They're so conspiratorialist, you would think that they're a member of the Mossad in Argentina. But anyway, Islamic State is known as Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And that was the first name this group of radical Arabs gave themselves. And they were born out of Bush's invasion of Iraq, which was a criminal war and a war of choice and a war of weapons of mass destruction that somehow never were proven, developed, or found. The Islamic ISIL, and also Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, in Iraq and Syria also means Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, which is for those of you who know history, the archaic Arabic term for that region. Now, ISIL, as opposed to ISIS, means Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Levant is the old European, it comes out of the Latin language, word for that area which includes today Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, which was the ancient empire of Assyria. Now, the 10 northern tribes of Israel migrated into the Assyrian Empire, and the 2 that stayed Jewish remained in Judea and Samaria, whereas today Jerusalem and Bethlehem and that area, Hebron. So that is the term now IS is Islamic State. That's simple, Islamic State. So now the Republican conspiratorial people like Jeb Bush and Ben Carson, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Billy Crystal, who's a moron, and all these other neoconservative fascists.
I thought Billy Crystal was an actor.
No, William Crystal, his father was one of the founders of the neocon movement. He's a Republican pundit who goes on the air in television on all these major stations, and every prediction he's ever made has turned out to be a disaster. In fact, since July, and our guest Jed will be able to speak to this, since July, Bill Crystal has said 100 times, every week this is the last week of Trump. And every week Trump grows and grows and grows. Anyway, if he keeps on going like this, he's going to deny that Trump exists right into the White House. Now, let me say this. The conspiratorialist neocon fascists in America, who are completely owned by the Zionist regime, and I say that as a Jew, because as a Jew, I love Israel. I love Judaism, but I do not like Zionists. As the famous American justice on the Supreme Court, Louis Brandeis, said, Zionism is not Judaism. Zionism is a rabid political and secular movement intended to gain and occupy land that it has no right to. So I am not a Zionist, I am a Jew. Now, let me say this. They believe that President Obama refers to ISIL instead of ISIS because in their sick mind, which fell out of a pea pod stepped on by a jackass, they believe that Obama is sending a secret message to the world that ISIL is really in charge of the Levant, which includes ancient Israel, and that he secretly wants ISIL to be the Trojan horse that goes into Israel and God have mercy on Israel. That's what they say. Our commander-in-chief wants to ravage the gates to the Holy Land and allow ISIL to destroy it because he is a secret Muslim born in Kenya, whose sole ambition in life is to destroy the great America built up by George W. Midget Pygmy Brain Bush and his armies. So if anyone does not understand the difference between ISIS, ISIL, and ICE now, with the political implications and the secret conspiratorial views, I'll be a quiz on Tuesday, and if you failed, I'll regrade you after I you again.
Thank you.
Let me say one more thing.
Go on.
The Republican candidates have now reacted to the Paris attacks. And Jed, I imagine, being a country western boy, will be able to enlighten us as to how anyone who questioned anything George W. Midget Brain Pygmy Bush said about those of us who opposed the Iraq War as being traitors would say. But now, this Hugh Hewitt has said that this war was created by Islamic terrorists without any mention of George W. Bush's illegal war on Iraq. Jeb Bush has said that his brother did a much better job at fighting the war, and if Obama had never become elected, we would have won the war, as if 7 years wasn't enough time for Pygmy Brain to do anything. And Donald Rumsfeld, saying you go to the war with the army you've got, not the army you want, as if you can't prepare. What a moron. Now, Carson said we can't allow one single Syrian refugee into the United States. Quote, to bring them here when we have tens of millions of people who are suffering economically doesn't make any economic sense. Well, this brain surgeon has been operating on a sponge from the bottom of the Mediterranean Ocean or a sea or Black Sea or whatever sea, maybe the Tanzania Lake, his entire life, and he thought it was a brain. Said, we cannot let those who want to come to America to disrupt our lives. Well, that's funny from a Cuban who swam over here to disrupt our lives in Miami and in Florida and the whole Republican Party. And finally, South Carolina senator has said the attack in Paris was a, quote, an attack on human decency. Oh, that's really unique. We didn't think of that. I'm so glad South Carolina told us an attack on 128 dead youth in Paris is an attack on human decency. Why, who would have ever thought that if it hadn't been for Miss Lindsey Graham? So that's what it is from Connecticut, USA. Welcome, Kervin, and welcome my good friend from Kentucky, the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln, the American Moses, Jed the Hillbilly.
Wow. Well, David, I don't even know how we're going to top that tonight. That in itself is a show all by itself. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I thank the world for giving me life.
Yeah, your pleasure. It sounded like you was having an absolutely great time there at somebody else's expense. Absolutely fun.
Don't talk about her.
Right. Well, listen, I'd like to move on very quickly to our guest of honor tonight. And I do say honor because it is an honor to have with us Hillbilly Jed, who is an activist. He's got his own blog. He's got his own radio show. He does his own thing up there in South, or shall I say down there in South. Well, I'm down here, or you're up there, or we're across from each other, or whatever we are. But we're on one side of the ocean and you're on the other side. But still, one's up, one's down, or the other's across. We'll get to that point one day or the other. But in the meantime, let me just welcome and introduce Hillbilly Jed. Good evening, Hillbilly Jed.
Good evening, Kervin.
And how would you like yourself to be referred to tonight?
Just Jed will be fine.
Okay, well, Jed, it's a fantastic opportunity to share with you what's going on in Kentucky. Introduce yourself, my friend.
My name is Jed Biggs. I go by Hillbilly Jed because I run a website called Hillbilly News. I'd like to talk a little bit about this Paris event. I would like to send prayers and thoughts out to all the families that were affected by this, and This is a tragic event of some terrorists that come in there trying to push an agenda to disrupt the refugees coming into America, which the Republican Party sets back and claims that we don't need no refugees, which is a bunch of horse hockey. In order to get to the bottom of this, we've got to go back to Kuwait. I want to take you on a little trip back to Kuwait when Pappy Bush decided we had to go over and run Saddam Hussein out of there, which was the correct thing to do at the time. But Pappy had a little bit more brains than George W. did. Pappy pushed him back across the border a little bit, and then he pulled out. Well, when he did that, the people who ended up in George W.'s administration was all upset and aggravated that he didn't push Saddam right back into Iraq, there, right back into the city. Well, Pappy Bush had better brains and knew what was going to happen if he pushed the forces back in there. He knew the backlash that was coming, and so he had better sense. But now when George W. went in there after 9/11, this was all a contrived mess to invade Iraq from the minute that 9/11 happened. Their war room was together, and it was a slam dunk as
George Tenet.
Yeah, George Tenet said it was a slam dunk from minute one, which it wasn't. And this is where we begin to see the beginning of the rise of people who were against what George Bush was doing, because he was making a group of people who had been kept under control by Saddam Hussein. I don't in no way support what Saddam Hussein did or what he was doing to the people, but what you got to give him kudos for was he was holding down Al-Qaeda. He was holding down the aspects of what would have been ISIS or ISIL. He was holding down this aspect. So when we went in there, when George W. Bush went in there and took out Saddam Hussein, what he done was he opened up the whole Middle East and Iraq for these people who could rise up and take a view like some of our Republican friends like to use the Old Testament as a way to usher in Christian Sharia law, I call it, or what they're trying to do, as we see it in Kentucky with Kim Davis and her little spiel there. Now the old-time Islamic believers in certain parts of the Quran and the law, they're pushing that radical aspect of the Quran, and it's risen up over there, and that's how we see ISIS become ISIS and who they are. There's an aspect of that right here in the United States going on right now. I call them the radical right-wing party. The moderates have all been pushed out by this radical right wing, and the Tea Party themselves are a big problem of this, and they push Sharia law. It's Christian. I like to call it Christian Sharia law, because they want this country to be ruled by biblical laws. And this cannot happen, because if you've read the Old Testament, and if you know about the Old Testament, you will understand the Old Testament was an attempt for a country, Israel, to be governed by law, by biblical law. It did not work. It could not work. They made so many laws, so many stupid laws, that when Jesus came, he said, look, these old laws, they don't work. So the Old Testament was fulfilled, and now we can no longer live by the Old Testament and the laws. That's exactly what the Republican Party is trying to bring back in. This Kim Davis issue, you saw everybody get behind and want to push, is a result of the Republican Party. Now, this Islamic State, or whatever you want to call it, I like to call them radical Muslims. That's what I like to call them, because I think it's a radical faction of the Muslim nation, just like we have a radical faction of the Republican Party here in America. we have a radical faction too. Separating the two, if you look at them real close, there's not very much separating the two in some of their some of their beliefs, their biblical beliefs. But what we need in this country, and what the world needs, is some compassion and love, and come together and live as humanity is supposed to live, as humanity was supposed to evolve, instead of going backwards. And that's what I have to say about the Paris event.
Now, let me say this.
Just
about,
1 second. Just 1 second before you go ahead. The last report that I'm just having coming through right now is 129 were killed, 360 odd were injured, with 99 of them very seriously injured. That's the latest statistics that we have coming out of Paris right now as we speak.
That's a horror. I wanted to add, I think that Jed makes a very good point. And Jed, you may not know, but I served on the George H.W. Bush Library Board Foundation at Texas A&M. And I had opportunities on many occasions to speak with the president, and I did, the former president. He was very opposed to the Iraq War, and his best friend in the whole world, people don't know this, is Brent Scowcroft, the retired lieutenant general who was his national security advisor. And Brent used to always say, and the president agreed with him, that the problem was never defeating Saddam Hussein in Kuwait or in Iraq. That was no problem. We could do that, especially with Colin Powell's 500,000 men over there in uniform versus Donald Rumsfeld's idea that you could do it with 35,000 soldiers and I think he said something like $20 billion that would all be repaid in the first month. That's turned into $4 trillion if you look at it over 20 years and repaying the debt that we borrowed from China to pay for it. 6,000 dead Americans, which is more than 1/5 of what they thought they could win it with, and nearly 100,000 wounded Americans, and not physically wounded, and no telling, maybe up to 1 million Americans psychologically wounded. So what Bush said, and Brent Scowcroft said many times, is we had no problem defeating Saddam Hussein, but we could never figure out how to get out of there once we went in. So we decided not to go in. So that's a very important corollary to the wonderful story you told.
Amen. It's quite fitting that Jed talks about the Old Testament and the New Testament, because religion, faith, beliefs play a major part in what we're seeing shape the world today. And I suppose what Jed is trying to say is that the Old Testament was that of God's wrath and the punishment and the wrath of God, whereas the New Testament talks more about grace, and we're living in a time of grace, and that is a grace that should be afforded to every nation, to every member, because as the word says, go out into the world, go out into the nation and make disciples of the world. So that's where the gospel is coming from, and I do appreciate that gospel coming in there, Jed.
Let me add in also that we can't think that we don't, in my faith, Judaism, we don't call it the Old Testament. Testament means witness in Greek. It comes from testis. It doesn't mean testicles, it means witness. Now, we don't say old. We say the Hebrew Bible, which is what you call the Old Testament. We say the Torah, which is the first 5 books of Moses. Yeah. He only had 5 books, actually. So the 5 books of Moses. And then the New Testament is a New Testament following. But remember that when Jed says that the New Testament reflects a religion of mercy, kindness, love, and a new way of life, yes, but remember, the man who taught that was Jewish. He was a rabbi named Jesus of Nazareth. So that Jew authored and inspired the New Testament. So really, in our mind, it's an ongoing development of what was Judaism. So to divide the two, and then the third one that came on top was Muhammad's theory out of Mecca, Islam, to divide those into two Old Testament, New Testament, and then into Islam, a third division, and then a fourth one into Protestantism versus the church, which ruled for 1,000 years as Rome. Well, 1,500 years, actually, because Martin Luther came along in 1519. So if you divide, and then Henry VIII, 1533, he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn because she was better looking than his Spanish queen, Catherine of Aragon, and you get English Protestantism. And he didn't like the Pope telling him what to do, so he became head of the church. If you divide these into 4, 5, 6, 7, you are establishing the very means by which hate, racism, discrimination, and people like Kim Davis develops ulterior ideas and motives that contradict everything taught in Judaism, Christianity, and Muslim, which is to obey the secular law and give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to be a good citizen, a patriotic citizen, to love your government, to pray for your government, and to do what is legally right, not to decide for yourself what is legally right. And I think the radical, religious, evangelical, right-wing, Republican, neo-fascist American Party has developed this sense that they are above the law. Now, where do they get this idea? They get it largely from their co-sponsor, Israel, which believes that because they suffered the Holocaust, and my family suffered too, they are above the law. They don't have to belong to the International Atomic Energy Agency. They can have nuclear weapons that are not inspected, though Russia and America have ours inspected, and they demand Iran be inspected. But they are above inspection. They can use weapons. They can use phosphorus gas. They can go in and kill 2,700 innocent people in Gaza without one protest in the civilized world, without being called an anti-Semite. They can teach that Muslims should be treated like rabid dogs in cages at universities in America, and no one says a word. But God forbid if you say a Jew broke his fingernail, you're an anti-Semite. So they want to curtail this. Stephen Harper in Canada wanted to pass a law to say if you advocated for sanctions against Israel because it's occupying and building settlements, you're an anti-Semite. The University of California wanted to do the same. And this week, the greatest democracy in the Middle East, Israel, according to their own Hasbara propaganda, passed a law, the first reading of a law by a huge majority saying, any Jew like me, I have a right to come to Israel anytime I choose. Any Jew or anybody else who criticizes Israel can be denied entry into Israel, the home that is meant to be the refugee state for any Jew anywhere in the world as a result of the Holocaust. Now they pass a law saying if we exercise our freedom of speech to persuade the Israelis to do the right thing, we are denied entry. And the Republicans are doing the same in this country. And we have to look at this. Why is Israel training our police forces? Why have our police forces treated our citizens, especially blacks and Hispanics and other minorities, as though they are Palestinians who could be shot on sight and nobody says a word? Why are our police all of a sudden armed like military forces with military weapons, military uniforms, and military attitudes, but without military training? Why? Because Israel is sending armies over here to train our civilian police, and it has to stop. We either have freedom or we don't have freedom. And one day, Americans are going to wake up and find out because they have the right to carry a little .22 caliber pistol, they don't have any more freedom than if they were flying an F-16 jet fighter.
Well, you know, David, that's a very impassioned statement, and I get where you're coming from because you are a Jew, you have your connections with Israel and a viewpoint that comes from it. But Jed, up there, down there, or across there in the South, in little hillbilly land of Kentucky, what is your view over there about this Israel situation and how America has aligned itself with it?
David makes a very good point, and he's right on key. Islam, Judaism, and Christianity is not three different religions. It is the same religion. They worship the same God. They all came from the loins of Abraham. Until we as a people can understand this and come together and put away our differences in what the Bible says or what it says not to do or to do, if we can become one humanity, then we will have solved this problem. I think that was Jesus' plan all along, is for humanity to evolve into a point to where we could understand and live with each other and worship the way that it's supposed to be worshiped. Now, as far as how hillbillies think about Israel, 99% of the hillbillies and the people in Kentucky support whatever Israel does. And let me tell you why. They think Israel, according to the Bible, is the chosen people of God, and will, in the end times, in which they believe a lot in, will be is God's chosen people. And if we align ourselves with Israel, we will therefore receive favor from God, which will allow, us to be a better people, or receive or go to heaven or something of that nature. But I point out to them when they bring up the point that, yes, Israel is the chosen people of God. But you have, how many factions do you have in Israel that worship under different, not all Jews are Orthodox. Some are not, they don't, in other words, they don't all worship under the same rules or
tradition. We don't all have the same tradition.
Right.
We have Orthodox, we have conservative, we have Reform, and then we have Hasidim, then we have the settlers, and then we have atheists, and we have secular. Jews are like any other people in the world. We're all divided.
Exactly. And we need to come together as a humanity. I mean, this is a big argument among American people right now. I think I posted one day, somebody said, Israel is the chosen people of God. I said, yes, he is. But I said, which sect are you talking about that's going to be saved? Is it going to be all of them, or this part or that part? And they said, well, they talk about Israel going to war again with Islam nation. And I bring out this point. I said, God allowed them to be destroyed over 100 times in the Bible. If we align ourselves to them to the point to where we are committing inhumane activities ourselves, how do we know that he's not going to let them be destroyed again? And the one that's saved in the end may be a completely different Israel. You know,
Jed, let me ask you this, Jed. I have a really important question. I know that people in a lot of places in America struggle with education. After 1954, Brown versus Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, a lot of white people fled the public school system. They created private schools, and public education began to descend, and today we're paying the results for that. All right. Now, having said that, are the people in Kentucky and the other Bible Belt states, are they so misled? Are they so illogical? Are they so emotionally tied to this idea of Israel? Do they not, these same people who say Jews are the chosen people, so they will say to me, oh, you're a Jew, you're a chosen person of God. But then if I say to them, well, when I die, will I go to heaven? Well, if you've been saved. Well, what does being saved mean? Well, you've got to accept Jesus Christ as God. Well, I can't accept Jesus Christ as God. I'm a Jew. And so they are saying in one breath, I'm the chosen person of God. But with the next breath, they say, I'm going to hell. And they really believe it. So are they so dumb that they don't understand that in that situation, I'd rather not be chosen? Have they never seen Fiddler on the Roof when the pogrom is coming and Tevi says, I know, God, we're the chosen people. But can't you choose somebody else sometimes?
Very, very true. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all called, but many are called, a few are chosen.
I know, but I'm asking Jed, explain to me how that contradiction cannot rise to the level of consciousness in their pea brains.
It's from what I can find out through my research and things of that nature, it is taught from them. It is taught to the children. By the time they can go to church, this is being taught to them in church and drilled into their heads, along with other things that are bigotry and racist. And that's how they grow up, and they believe that. I mean, if it's been drilled into your head for 15, 20 years, that's what you're going to believe in the end. What I don't understand is with the technology today that you have with the internet and ways to research, why they do not get out there and research this and make up their own minds. My view is the younger generation coming up is their only hope. If they do not fall into this old-time beliefs and isms and traditions and customs and actually get out there and study for themselves and find out what the real truth is, then we don't have no hope.
But Jed, how are they going to do that being locked into poverty? Look at Kentucky, how poor it is. You've just elected a governor that has promised to remove 500,000 people from Obamacare's health insurance. They would rather vote for Israel, evangelicals, Republican neo-Nazis than to have health for their own children, their own mothers. Women who had breast cancer can't get health insurance. Children who've had leukemia can't get health insurance. They vote against their own interest. How are you going to get them to change when they're living in abject poverty, poor education, and their fathers are dying from cold lung? How are you going to get them to change? How?
The only way I know to get them to change is to start teaching them young. Now, I'm seeing some parents today teaching their children against the old traditional ways. The other day, I posted something to the effect that about Kentucky governor. I said, let's see how the Christian right wing now will enjoy eating their guns and their Bibles. In other words, and I had this guy come back and said, I'll take my guns and Bibles any day over, voting for Republican. This is something that's got to be phased out over time. And really, it's disappointing. I get disappointed sometimes in the way my own fellow Kentuckians vote, and we haven't voted Republican since Bill Clinton.
And you know, the funny thing is,
different Democrat.
One minute, David. The funny thing is the difference in beliefs between cultures, ethnicities, and religions. Right, the difference in beliefs creates an absolutely massive vacuum that does not allow people to come together, right, for a common purpose, right, because of the difference of those beliefs. Now, take away the title religion or specific religion, and look at the author and the perfecter of your faith, which is the God, the one God that we all happen to believe in, irrespective of all the different connotations that have come from that. If we believe that God created heaven and earth, man and woman, child and beast, right, and God's word is divine, God's word needs to be honored, and God needs to be worshipped because He's a jealous God anyway, right? Then because at the end of the day, is it not the propaganda of all of these individuals who for their own purposes, for their own greed, for their own agenda, right, has created the rift in the first place? Is that not what the battle has been from day one?
Yeah, I agree. It's the propaganda. Excuse me.
And that's all it's ever been is propaganda to keep it. Because the bottom line is, if everybody was just to come together underneath one banner, these crooks, right, these corrupted world leaders would actually have no one to rule, would they?
They wouldn't have the power they have either. That's the thing. The leaders and the rich people use the poor and the underclass to achieve something that is hurting their own selves, and I don't understand that either. Go ahead.
No, and then the bottom line is then they hold out these little olive branches, these little golden nuggets. We'll give you a little bit of this, or we'll give you a little bit of that, and then you've got all these poor people who are, yeah, okay, because they're tired of being poor. So
well, in Kentucky,
yeah, but let me say, Jed, let me say this: what you just said, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but you said the Republicans and these rich people use the poor people to vote them in office and give them power. But you can't blame the Republicans and the GOP any more than you can blame a man who goes to Las Vegas and sleeps with a prostitute for $100. The prostitute takes the money, so she's guilty too. And you can't blame them for making her a prostitute. They're taking advantage of it. Now, the poor people in Kentucky and the rest of America who vote for Republicans are no different than that prostitute. They take that emotional high as payment for their vote, that they're better than blacks, they're better than Muslims, they're better than everybody else, and they're certainly better than Democrats who love black people. And you know what they call them? The in-lovers, the bloody blue-nosed do-gooders. Why, if you vote in Kentucky as a Democrat, those Republicans are going to say to you, what are you, a communist, a queer, or an in-lover? And you know that they're going to say it.
Exactly. The people are their own worst enemy. You're exactly right.
Their own worst enemy.
They're creating the problem. But here's the thing. In Kentucky, Democrats outnumber Republicans 3-1. Yeah,
but the white people in America are 77% of the population. In Kentucky, they're 88% of the population, and they vote white. They don't vote Republican or Democrat. They vote white, and white means R, Republican.
That's exactly right. You've hit the point right there. You have hit the point right there. They would vote ideas, emotions over food, health care, God. They vote God real big here. They're against abortions real big here. It's Christianity, guns, and God. That is what Kentucky votes.
Here's a question. One question: how does Christianity, guns, and God fit in the same sentence?
How does what now?
How does Christianity, God, and guns fit in the same sentence?
Okay, they vote God as the supreme being, Christianity as their
way
ism.
to it.
Way to it. The ism, the doctrine, the however you want to put it. And guns, they see as a God-given right. They see that as their God-given right to own guns, or as many guns as they want, or a tank, or an airplane, like David was talking about earlier.
Then does that not just totally contradict the New Testament grace that we just spoke about shortly a while ago? Because if it's grace and vengeance is mine, says the Lord, then we should pray for those who persecute us. And again, I'm not saying that you lay down and be a doormat, but your God-given right to carry a gun and kill your neighbor.
Let me add to that, Kervin, and I'm sure Jed will correct me if I'm wrong. But in the days of slavery, and then after Ferguson in 1894, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, the American black could not carry a gun. That was just not even allowed. You saw a black man walking down the street with a gun, you could shoot him on sight. So white people could carry guns, and that gun was a symbol of their superiority over those black people that Mr. Lincoln let go and hurt our plantation. So to own a gun in modern America is to be reminiscent of and to recollect the glorious past when the white Southerner was superior to those uppity blacks. And that is why they love guns.
Wow. That's powerful, that is, David.
Am I right or wrong, Jed? What would happen, Jed? Let me ask you, Jed, what would happen if all the black people in Kentucky, all 12% of them, or all the black people in Georgia, 32% of them, all the black people in Alabama, 29% of the population, what if all those black people who are not felons And by the way, the government makes sure they become felons so that, number one, they can't vote. Number two, they can't have a gun. So if all those people who had the right, including Rosa Parks and Grandma Moses and everybody else, every black person above 21 who is legally entitled to own a gun, what if they all started holstering weapons like the white folks do? What would happen? How many lynchings would you have in those states?
Well, it's just like when the Black Panthers armed themselves. The first thing we heard was, let's have gun control. Does any of y'all remember that?
Oh, I do.
They did. They wanted gun control. When things become equal, seems like the white population gets more nervous and they don't have that foot up or that extra power. It makes them nervous. That's what we're seeing with this let's get rid of all the Muslims idea. It's a power trip that white people have been on for 200 years, and if they have to give up a little bit of that power, they feel like they're being disfranchised.
Let me share a little story with you guys, right, which sounds totally unrelated to what we're just talking about, but isn't, right? Now, I want you to just humor me for a couple of minutes, all right, and bear with me as I tell you this story. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about cricket out in America. Do you guys know about cricket?
Those are things that we step on in the night when they chirp too much.
No, it's a sport over here, and it's played. Yeah, okay, all right. Now, back in the 70s, 80s, and especially the early 90s, the West Indians were the formidable, especially the 70s and 80s. They were the formidable team, and hardly lost. And then they brought about the fast-paced bowling, the likes of Michael Holding and Malcolm Marshall and Andy Roberts and the likes. And they were whittling out the Australians and the English and everybody else for very little runs and scoring absolutely significant runs and just winning the games quite easily, right? And so therefore, because the English were the leaders in the World Cricketing Council, they changed the rules of the game. And they decided to slow down the West Indian bowlers because the West Indian fast bowling was the number one ammunition that was winning them the game. So now they decided that they was only allowed to fire one bouncer per over, which meant that they had to reduce the pace in which they bowled. Now, you're talking about a genuine athleticism. They were just fast. They bowled faster. There was no secret weapon. They didn't have a special ball. They didn't have a secret bat. They didn't have anything. The tools weren't any different. And that's what allowed the English to actually get themselves equal in this particular playing field. And what I'm hearing here is how there is a constant leveling of the playing field, especially because the black people are always held down, the poor are always kept in their place, and those who have continue to rise above those who have not. It seems to be very much a tactic that has been used not just in the arena of war, but in every environment in which we live in order to keep the oppressed down. Now, this is nothing new. We're not hearing anything new here. This is something that's gone on through every single environment and area in which we live, from sports to politics. And all we're seeing out in Paris, what we're seeing out in Ferguson, what we're seeing out there in Florida and all the other Kentucky and everywhere else is people actually exhibiting this very same power that they have because they are the ones in authority. Now, the question has to be, how do we change the power of authority? That has to be where we start looking to make that difference, doesn't it?
I think so. Let me relate a little story to you, something kind of along the lines of what you just said, but maybe a little more potent. Back in the 60s, you had a Kentucky basketball team run by Adolph Rupp. Everybody has heard of Adolph Rupp. He's probably heralded as one of the best basketball coaches to ever coach basketball. You also had a little team in Texas called Texas A&M. Texas A&M didn't have a lot of players, a lot of good white players and players like that. So what they did was they fielded a team of 5 black starting players. And they called hell throughout the United States, everywhere they played, they were called all the names we hear them being called today. Coach Rupp said that black players did not have the, I don't know what other word to use other than brains enough to come together and make a cohesive team to where they could pass and follow plays and score like the white boys did. The white boys were more cohesive. They could play a better game, follow the rules, and things of that nature. Well, it come out that year that Texas A&M went all the way and won the NCAA and beat Kentucky in the last game when Kentucky had one of the better teams in the country that year. And I think it was still 2 to 3 years, before Kentucky ever recruited a black player. Now, it's a mindset. It's a mindset that has to be changed year by year, and it has to be changed by the younger generation. Us older generation, we can say what we can say and do what we can do to point this out. But the only hope is that the younger generation can pick up where we left off and make our society a better society for humanity as a whole.
What makes you think that they can do that, Jed?
I'm seeing it happen.
How so?
I'm seeing the younger kids going to grade school and things of that nature that are not following along with the old Christianity views and things of that nature. They're not following the old time religion, as we call it here in Kentucky, and they're more accepting of gays, and they're more accepting of we only have 600 black people in the whole county of Harlan County. That's all we have. I mean, you may go 3 weeks and never see a black person. So I'm seeing a change in the younger people's way of thinking they're saying, wait a minute, all this stuff I've been taught by these older people just is not true. So that's where our hope lies.
And there is a movement of the younger generation moving towards God and faith now, isn't there? Right across the world.
Yeah, there is, and it's not that old-timey faith either.
And it's a very vibrant movement in the students' unions. They've got representatives. We're seeing young people come to faith and walking in that faith more often than not now.
There are two problems there. Number one, in America, young people don't vote. And by the time they get middle age, they already become Republican infiltrated. And number two, how do you explain, I don't mean to be argumentative, but how do you explain your new governor largely being elected because he embraced the hatred and lawlessness expressed by that homophobe Kim Davis?
I have the answer to that in a podcast called "There's a damn Ian in the White House."
Yeah, I've seen that one.
The answer lays in that.
Well, tell us. Open up that pod and shed the seed.
It's racism. It is nothing other than pure racism.
But racism, you mean homophobia? I mean, gays are white people, right? And black people and everybody. How do you call homophobia racism? Isn't it homophobia, hatred for gay people?
Yeah, they're more racist than they are homophobic.
So the racists vote against gay people.
They vote against gay. The reason we lost the senator seat to Rand Paul, and I've heard this over and over from people. I mean, in casual conversation. There's a black guy in office. He's running this country. We don't need nobody like that in office. It's strictly because there was a black man in the White House. You got to live in Kentucky and be bordering of Tennessee and Virginia to understand just how prevalent racism still exists in these southern states. I mean, it is a staple diet of people when they get up in the morning.
Now, are those people, let me ask you, Jed, are those people in Kentucky so stupid as not to realize the most famous, the most worldwide, in fact, I I was watching this horrible, horrible, horrible event in Paris on television last night, and they were showing that stadium, the Stade Français, and they were showing the advertisement in the stadium flipping over. And you know what I kept seeing? Kentucky Fried Chicken, Colonel Sanders. Now, as I recall, Kentucky Fried Chicken was begun somewhere in Kentucky. I think in like Corbin or somewhere. I can't remember. But
Yeah,
Kentucky
Corbin.
Fried Chicken. Now, there would be no Kentucky Fried Chicken if it wasn't for African Americans. They invented fried chicken. Everybody knows that the plantation owners of Virginia were introduced to fried chicken, which was unknown until African slaves came over here. Now, Africans and blacks and American blacks have contributed overwhelmingly to the culture, the civilization, the music, the food, the religion, the entire social fabric of the South. Where does this racism come from? What is driving it? What makes it mandatory for those white, uneducated people to project it?
Well, here is where the key lies. If you've got 600 blacks in Harlan County, how many times are white people going to come in contact with a black person, or unless they are at work or something? And all the outlying counties, other than Fayette County and Jefferson County, which has the highest population of black people, all the outlying counties are all the same as Kentucky. They have fewer than 400, 300, some of them of black people. In other words, they get this idea of what black people are from TV. They get it from the rights. They get it from news agencies and stuff like this. And plus, they're raised up. I can remember preachers preaching in Kentucky that black people never had a soul. Now,
They didn't have a soul.
they did not have a soul.
Did they
used to
ever
be-
pass a black church? I mean, they didn't see a black church? They didn't hear Dr. Martin Luther King?
No. Here in Harlan, we had one black church where most of the black people downtown went to church, and you could drive by and hear them singing and preaching. And my thoughts was, when I always drove by, man, that sounds like an awful spiritual good meeting to me. But that in Kentucky, at one time, there was a teaching, and it was in our churches, that black people did not have a soul.
How do God-fearing people justify such hatred in their hearts?
They go back to what David was talking about, the what we call the Old Bible, which is really the Torah, the five Bible,
But whether it's the old Bible or not, it doesn't teach you to hate another person for race.
The Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, the Hebrew Bible. Yeah, but they lived that.
But that doesn't teach racism against blacks. In fact, Moses was married to a black woman.
It just doesn't teach racism. So I don't see where it comes from.
Moses was married to a black woman.
But what it teaches, yeah, exactly. But what it teaches is that slavery was okay.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
if they can condone slavery, if they can condone now, where you agree with,
but slavery wasn't just conditioned or directed to any one particular race, was it?
No.
I don't know if they see it that way.
No. Even Jews could be slaves. The only thing is,
so slavery was something that anybody could fall into.
But wait a minute. The Bible says very clearly, the Old Testament, as you call it, the Hebrew Bible says very clearly, if you are a slave, you must be redeemed after 7 years, and your owner must give you your wages for 1 whole year. And if you refuse to be freed, then he has a right to put an earring in your ear, and then you are attached to his family for life. So slavery was not a permanent state as it was in the American South. No. It was only a 7-year indentured servitude referred to as slavery.
But the question still lies as to where did the hatred for the slaves stem from? Okay, I'm not justifying or condoning slavery, right? But it took place. It happened. My question still has to be: where did the hatred, pure hatred for the slave, come from? and not just the pure hatred for the slave, the pure hatred for the black slave. Where was that born?
Color of your skin. Simple answer is the color of your skin. You're different. You're different. You're not like us. That's the way they saw it.
The white man wasn't like the black man either.
Wait, let me say this. But wait, let me add something here. First of all, Kervin, and Jed, you correct me if I'm wrong on this. First of all, the white people who owned slaves were Christians. Now, they believed that their soul was answerable to God. They also believed in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. But what that meant to them was all men have an opportunity to be equal. So they had to justify the ownership of another soul in God's image made by dehumanizing that black person. He was no longer a human. He was a monkey. And we know from the Darwinian debates of the 1920s and 30s, evolution, that white people said, we didn't come from a monkey. The black people came from a monkey. We came from God. So they dehumanized these people. That's the number one reason why they can look on black people today with such racism and disdain psychologically and religiously. Now, from the emotional point of view, the South looks upon the black as a unhuman because they blame the blacks for that dishonorable, unforgettable defeat in the Civil War, in which the Yankees came down and ripped the throats out of slave owners, burned their plantations from Atlanta to Savannah. They destroyed them in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, all the way to Texas. And they blame the black insurgent revolutionist traitors for that. And that carried over all the way to Dr. Martin Luther King by calling him an anti-American communist and Malcolm X a Panther communist, and the further hatred for the black for their loss in the Civil War. So it's based in religion, socioeconomic, and the Civil War, which they will never, ever forget, as proof by the fact that they ride around in pickup trucks with guns and the Confederate flag out of the back window.
And the thing is, you still see this going on today. The dehumanization of the black man gave the white man power over him. And right now what we're seeing in our government is a dehumanization of Muslims. We're seeing a dehumanization of immigrants. We're seeing a dehumanization of poor people. And they use this to gain political power. It's called Southern strategy. Look it up. It's in the dictionary. It's a certain political party that uses racism to keep a hold on a certain part of the country, the United States, which is predominantly the South. It's like war. You cannot go to war and shoot a man and kill him unless you look at him as something less than a human being. Our psyche and our brain and our conscience would not let us do that unless we can make him lower in our mind than what we are. In other words, we are superior over him. He is. We have to dehumanize them, and it's going on right today. And it's being used by a political party to keep power in these United States and all over the world.
You can't justify dehumanizing him anymore. You got a black man in the White House.
He means. Dehumanizing, delegitimizing.
No, I get that, but there's a black man in the White House, so this mentality of seeing them as unequals no longer has a ground to stand on.
But remember, American.
That's geological. You're talking geological here. How many southern states voted for Barack Obama?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many of them voted for him. He's their man, number one chief.
Yeah, but they don't accept.
Whether they accept it or not, it's fact that he is.
Yeah, he is. But still, yes.
And you see what they've done? They said the Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican neo-fascist, said on the very night Obama was inaugurated in 2009, January 20th, he said, "Every day we will work to make sure this is a failed presidency. Every day we will work to make sure this is a failed presidency, and they worked at it every day.
Even at the detriment of their own country, their own town, their own state of living.
But that's how we started, Jed. Isn't that how we started this? That the Kentucky rednecks and Southern rednecks, they vote against their own interest because racism has a greater priority than does their health care and food.
Wow.
Exactly. We see this same thing. Now, I know we was going to talk about police brutality. Let's kind of get on into that a little bit.
Go ahead.
We see this same dehumanization falling over into police brutality, because when these police shoot a black guy running away from him and seeing him, he is not shooting someone who's that he sees as on the same level as him. He sees them as lesser of a person. That's how you can pull that trigger on someone. If he saw him as an equal human being, there's no way he could commit murder the way they do. Police brutality. Here's the crux about police brutality. I think Dr. David here will probably agree with me. You see all this about the body cameras and stuff being put on police. Okay, you're putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
Yeah.
What you're doing. The core of police brutality is within the police departments themselves, writing their own policies and procedures and writing their own engagement rules. I live in Kentucky. We do not have this problem because the people in Kentucky would not stand still for someone shooting someone unarmed. I know policemen from way back that used to pack what they call throwaway guns. They kept them because if they shot an unarmed man, they had to drop that gun down beside of him and say he was armed, or they would be going to prison. When did we as a people decide it was okay to start policing on assumption that people were going to do this or going to do that, or if they move their hand, it give a policeman a right to shoot them? Or when did we as humanity decide it was okay for a policeman to put himself in danger himself, and then I was afraid for my life? I have seen this happen over and over.
The moment that statement became acceptable excuse for murder, I was in fear for my life. It opened up a Pandora's box. And now we're seeing the results of that being an acceptable defense, wholesalely handed out and given by every officer who is now placed in front of his peers for pulling out a gun and killing an unarmed individual. His commonplace statement is, I was in fear for my life, and he doesn't actually have to explain that in any great detail. That's an acceptable line that okay, pat on the back, well done, at least you're okay, mate.
But it's no different. I mean, look in Israel. You can shoot a Palestinian. Oh, he had a knife. I thought he had a knife, so you can shoot him. It's no different. Once you delegitimize a human being, and Hitler did it the best by calling Jews rats and vermin and an infestation of Europe, he delegitimized Jews. He took their jobs. He took their money. He then dehumanized them. And then when he killed them, nobody said anything because they weren't human anymore. And we have done the same to African Americans. We've delegitimized them. We put them in bonds. We then put them in Jim Crow. Then we put them in segregation. Then we've treated them as free people, but who are not people with souls. And now we shoot them on sight. We say we're in fear of our life, or they have a knife or whatever, and no one does anything about it. Look at this poor man, Mr. Lambert. 2 years ago, we're just learning it. 2 years ago, and Jed, you might want to comment on this too, because I doubt in the UK they've seen the video that we have on television. 2 years ago, 3 police officers in Virginia arrested a man who was high on cocaine. He was very, very sick. He was under a paranoid state because he was drugged up to the T. They were going to take him to the hospital. They took him to the hospital. He was afraid. He kicked out the window and he ran to the hospital door. They then proceeded to electrocute him with, what do they call these things? Tasers.
Tasers.
And every volt, every time they shoot him, it's 50,000 volts of electricity. 50,000. After 3 is considered a danger to his life. They put this man in the car like a trapped animal and tasered him over 20 times. He then died. 1 hour later, he died. 20 times. I wouldn't do it to the most wild animal in the jungles of the Congo. And they did this to a human being. And what's happened to those 3 officers? All 3 got promoted in the last 2 years. Jed, comment on that.
I watched the video. Yeah, I seen the video. The first thing that caught my mind is when they refused him medical help. They, instead of taking him on into the hospital, in my opinion, they became participants in murder. They refused him medical help and continued to tase him, even tased him when he was out, when he was not responsive. And in my opinion, that's pure murder. Let me bring another case up. Zachary Hammond.
Yeah.
19-year-old kid in the car with his girlfriend. They just ordered a custard or something, ice cream. They were eating it. The young girl had called her contact to get a $20 bag of weed and accidentally called a cop or something of that nature. Cop set up a sting. And so the cop goes running towards the car. Zachary Hammond tries to pull out and leave, and the cop shoots him twice, once in the side and once in the back, and uses "I feared for my life" as a defense, when in fact, if there was any danger to his life, he did it himself. This can no longer be accepted in America as an excuse. We need a law, a federal law, written into effect, that there are certain circumstances when you cannot use this excuse as a police officer. I don't see that happening because I see the right-wing party, and a lot of people are going to say, well, a lot of Democrats too. Yeah, but I visited a lot of right-wing blogs, pages, and stuff like this. It is the majority of the right-wing party that is pushing for support for the cops to have more power. Donald Trump himself said it. I will give the cops more power to do it. And where's this going to stop? If we give them more power, when is precog going to kick in? In other words, they come and break down your door because they think they've looked over your profile and they think you're a criminal. When's it going to stop?
You know, it won't stop until we find a way to make it stop. And the bottom line is, you have this police brutality taking place right across America. Now, you said earlier on, Jed, that in the South where you are, they wouldn't tolerate police killing an unarmed individual, no matter what, because they just wouldn't stand for that. In that case, if they wouldn't stand for that, what is the view down south about the hundreds that are being shot right across the country?
Well, again, we're going back to the African American aspect of the whole deal. They had rather they can see someone being murdered by the cops, and they will stick up for the cops and call them a black thug or trash or this. It's even going into white people. What we're seeing happen to African Americans in the last 100 years is also now it's happening to the poorer section of white people, being degraded to the point to, they used it for 100 years and got by with it. So why not use it for other people like immigrants, Muslims, and white, the poorer white people? I mean, it worked.
What do you think, Dave?
I think that the issue in America has always been that the powerful, the top 1%, are supported by the top 25%. And those are primarily white people who have means, the upper middle class and the wealthy. And they see their power and the maintenance of that power and their economic standing, whatever that cost, to be the primary focus of this country, of this Federal Republic of the United States of America. And to maintain that power, they must ensure that the lower classes, that is the 30% of the poor white trash, and as they think of them, poor white trash, trailer park trash. I heard very wealthy people refer to Bill Clinton as Arkansas trailer park trash because he started off very poor. And blacks and Hispanics. They see these as the potential proletariat that would rise up and take from them some amount of their fortune or money. Most of that money is hidden in family not-for-profit trust. They have trillions, probably $15 trillion of American money is in non-taxable family trust, handed down like the great royal families of Europe from generation to generation. And if the poor whites were ever educated and the poor blacks were ever freed of the stigma of dehumanized delegitimization, they might ask, we want our fair share of the American dream. We want our fair share. You look at Kentucky. 3% of Kentucky businesses are owned by blacks. 3% of Kentucky's businesses are owned by blacks. 25% by women. None by Hispanics, maybe a 0.5%. The whites control everything, and they share it up, and they throw crumbs. But the great fear, the greatest fear in America, is that the poor, or the whites who are poor, or the blacks, may get enough power in the Senate and the House to change in some way the tax laws that will alter forever the United States of America. Now, already in Texas, which is a solid red state, not one single Democrat holds a state office, is 52% minority. It's a minority majority. 52% of Texas is Hispanic or black, or Hispanic, black, and Asian. And yet, the whites control everything by putting the fear of God in the blacks and the Hispanics, that if you make one misstep, we will expel you to Mexico, or we will take away your citizenship, or we will put you in prison, and that prison is going to be a living hell for you. That's what they say, that's what they mean, and that's how they keep power. And the only way we will ever end police brutality in the United States is to make the city, the town, the county, and the state and federal government pay dearly in the court system when they kill a human being like they killed Mr. Lambert or any other, or Sharon Bland, or any of these people. You must make them pay. And when they have to pay millions and millions and millions, like in my town of New London, Connecticut, we had to pay $1.5 million for the brutality of a black man a couple years ago. We just paid it this week. They will stop this. You know why they will stop it? Because they will not get an insurance company to cover their city or government, and they will go bankrupt. There will be no government. So if the white people want to keep any police at all, they're going to have to do it in a way that the police obey the law and no longer perpetrate crimes and are exempt from the laws of this country. All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I know very few black or Hispanic Americans or poor Americans who have life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness. And the second way, and I'll end on this note quickly, the second way they oppress the white people who are very poor is they infiltrate their communities, whether in Maine or New Hampshire or Iowa or Nebraska, with methamphetamine drugs and marijuana and cocaine. And they get them addicted to these heroin-based drugs so that they are so depressed or they're so denigrated as human beings that they either wind up dead, in prison, or out of the workforce altogether and out of the voting capacity because they have a felony record. So they use drugs, and they use police, and they use the taxation system to ensure that they maintain their status as the premier rulers over the great majority of the people in this nation.
Just talking about prisons and jails. Here's a question for you, Jed, and that's just come up on my screen here now. Right? Do you see mass incarceration as the ultimate expansion of enslavement, while they're having a squabble about race, giving them the ability to get one over on us? That's a question from a listener.
It's nothing but pure slavery. It's a way to enslave the underclass of people. I see it here in Kentucky. A poor man can go to court on one charge. A person of wealth can go to court on the same charge. The person of wealth will walk, and the poor person will get jail time and go to prison. We have way too many laws that are aimed directly at the poor. Dr. David is exactly right in what he just described. He's exactly right. Kentucky, in all states, all 50 states, if we were a country, we would be the seventh in line of having the most people incarcerated. We incarcerate more people in Kentucky than some countries do, and it is a shame. All you have to do is open up your little town newspaper and see who's going to jail for marijuana charge or some insignificant charge, and you never see nobody of wealth going. The drug issue, Dr. David is more than 100% right. He's 200% right. Here in our neck of the woods, the big problem is not cocaine. It's not designer drugs. It's not that. It is prescription drugs.
Same here in the UK. That's the biggest danger.
They got Oxycontin, oxycodone. I could go on and name you a dozen.
Percocet. Percocet's a big one.
Percocet. Meth. Meth's a big thing here in Kentucky.
Oh, huge.
It's easy made and cheap, and it is people without hope. That's what people don't see. It is a societal problem. It is people who don't have hope. They wake up in the morning and they say, my God, I'm living the same hell over and over and over again. I'd just soon to be doped up and not have to feel this. That's what's going on. There's no hope for people anymore. We can see people flipping hamburgers for $7 an hour and can't even pay rent, 1 month's rent it's just pitiful.
And then they vote Republican.
And then they'll turn around and vote Republican on God's guns.
And abortion. Don't forget abortion.
Abortion's a big issue here in Kentucky.
Yeah, I talked to a woman in Kansas. She was flipping burgers for $6.50 an hour. And I said, who are you voting for? She said, Republican. I said, do your children have health care? No. I said, do they go to a good school? She said, no. I said, where do you live? At my mother's house. I said, with your children? She said, yeah. I said, do you get child support from your husband? No. I said, are the police doing anything about it? No. I said, then why are you voting Republican? Why, they be against abortion.
I know.
It's also been stated that, in fact, along not just the blacks, but the number one race being killed by police in America are actually the American Indians.
I saw that
as a percent, certainly not as a total.
Right, as a percentage.
As a percent of their population, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Remember the American Indian did not have the right to vote until very recently. I mean, they weren't even included in the 13th Amendment. Remember that. The 15th Amendment gave the African Americans the absolute right to vote. The American Indians were exempted from that.
So why did it take so long to get the American Indians in a place where they can actually feel some form of equality?
Because the government used alcohol as a means to keep them in abject poverty on reservations so that the American businessman could go into their lands and rape them and steal from them all their oil, their gold, their coal, and their timber, and now their water.
as they've done to every other ethnicity throughout the world.
Well, the only difference is that what they've done in this country, they did to the people who own this country. I mean, what they've done in like Congo or Zaire or South America, they did with the tacit approval of their banana republic dictators. But in this country, we stole the land from the American Indian, and then we put them on a reservation, and then we found out we put them on a reservation that was blessed with gold and oil. We then stole it from them and put it in the Treasury Department, promised to give the money to them, and we've never given it to them because the Department of Agriculture, which manages the American Indian, is the most corrupt branch of government in the entire United States of America. I would say it's a more corrupt branch than is the Defense Department, because the Defense Department can only steal about $600 billion a year, but the Agriculture Department can steal whatever is in any land in the United States of America, which goes into the trillions.
And very similar to what the Australians did to the Aborigines, right?
I'd say worse, because it was on a much broader level. I mean, the Aborigines didn't sit on land as valuable as the American Indians, and they weren't as numerous, and they were kind of the same people. They were all Aborigines, whereas in this country you've got 50 or 100 different nations. The Cherokee is as different from the Mohawk as the Apache is from the Navajo. I mean, they're completely different people.
Absolutely, with different cultures and different beliefs.
Yeah.
If we can, make like the Indians, we call them savages. The country called them savages, and what they was doing was convincing the rest of the country, okay, it's okay to do whatever you want to these people. We see that happen with the African Americans. We're seeing that happen with the poor. If you'll notice,
and the Muslims,
and the Muslims, and the immigrants. I mean, this is the same. We're in a cycle. If we don't break it, it's going to continue.
Kervin, let me say something. Jed, you and I have never talked before this radio show, right?
That's correct.
All right, let me show you, Kervin, how ingrained the white man's hatred for the minority is in America. I will begin a sentence, and I bet you anything Jed can finish it. The only good Indian is a
dead Indian.
Ha! There you got it.
And it's I've heard this, and it's the same thing that's been said about the black man. It's a phrase that's been used on many fronts, and the bottom line is, we as people, as long as we allow these things to be said in our company, the one thing that I've learnt in life, and the one thing that I want to pass on, and I continue to pass on every opportunity that I get, is when something that's wrong is being done in front of you and you don't challenge it, you're actually saying that you're okay with it. We have to start challenging what's wrong. We can't sit down and sit on the fence, see wrongdoing take place in our vicinity, and say nothing. Because the only time evil succeeds is when good people, men and women, stand around and do nothing. So,
let me tell you, Kervin, I was in Montgomery, Alabama, and they call that the heart of Dixie. That's where Jefferson Davis was sworn in as the president of the Confederate Rebel States of America. Now, I was at a country club, and it was all white, and African Americans were serving us with white gloves. I felt very uncomfortable. I don't like that kind of a country club. Well, this man who was the president of Merrill Lynch in Montgomery, which is a big stock company, I think they were taken over by Bank of America because they stole so much damn money they went bankrupt. Well, this man thought he was in the company of another racist, meaning me, an upper-class, well-educated white American. So he told me this. Listen carefully what he said. He said, David, we in Alabama, we ain't got nothing against the black folk. In fact, we think everybody ought to own 3 or 4 niggers. I got up and I left. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm leaving for 2 reasons. There's an Alabama district judge who's an African American sitting by me who accepted you saying that. And I don't want to be in his company. And the second reason, you're a pig. And I don't eat with pigs. Because when you eat with a pig, you both get dirty, but the pig likes it. And I left.
Kervin has a good point. When we start accepting what people say on social media, with a wink of an eye and a nod, and don't come out and call it for what it is, we are condoning it. That's a simple fact. I've seen it happen. I'm on social media a lot. I do a lot of my work there, activism work there. And when you see, and I tell people all the time, when you see something that is not a fact, when you see something that is wrong, when you see something that goes against humanity, if you do not speak up, you're condoning it. Just like police brutality. If you watch a video or post a video and you don't say something about it, you're condoning what that cop did. That's what's wrong with America right now. Not enough people are standing up and saying enough is enough. Why? I don't know. I'm still looking into that. I don't know why people do not do that.
Silence is agreement. Silence is agreement. Silence is agreement. And we learned from Kristallnacht in 1938 when all the Germans sat on their hands while the Jewish synagogues were burned. 35,000 Jews were put in jail and a couple hundred were killed. And they just sat on their hands after the Jews had been their neighbors for 400 or 500 years. It was an absolute crime of silence. Silence is agreement, and it's deadly, and it's wrong. As the great Rabbi Avraham Heschel said, we are not all guilty, but we are all responsible.
Absolutely. You know, Jed, when you look at how divided the South is from the rest of the United States, and how far removed it may well be in its metabolical thinking in comparison to the rest of the world, do you feel isolated in your stance for police brutality in particular, and your down to your understanding of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like I'm a voice of a lone person crying in the wilderness. But I also know that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. If you speak out long enough and hard enough and often enough, you can change minds and you can change hearts. Even though I might not see the result of that in my lifetime, if I get through to 100 people, and they take that stance and they have children, and then they have children, in the end, I may have touched thousands of people. And that's how I see activism working to the positive aspect toward humanity.
If you raise your children in the ways of the Lord, He will not depart from it.
I have several podcasts of preachers from Tennessee and South Carolina. I think we have to make a concerted effort to tell people what is being taught in these churches. One of them says that this is a big church in North Carolina. Says we ought to take all gays and lesbians, separate them, put them in a big old fence, make a big old wall, drop food down into them. Now this is an actual church sermon, and said sooner or later they can't reproduce. They'll all die out. And I had this other one from Tennessee that tells his congregation, said if you ask me to marry if you're a white young lady and you ask me to marry you to a African American gentleman, I will quit church before I do that, because that goes against God's law. Now, this is what's being taught in the South. Religion is probably 50 to 60% of the problem is the doctrine, the isms, the traditions, and the customs.
Absolutely, spot on.
If we can get rid of these doctrines and isms and traditions and customs, as Paul spoke about in Corinthians, about long hair, he said that's just a custom. Not everybody goes with that. If we can understand that what they're being taught, that's the reason we have to rely on our children.
Absolutely.
And we have to.
Let me, Jed, how is, Kervin, I'm sorry, I know we're coming up on 20 minutes, and I kind of wanted to get Jed's take on what's happening with Ben Carson and Ted Cruz and Trump's view on
we're gonna
11 million
yeah.
Americans. But especially I want his view on Ben Carson and what he says. But go ahead, Kervin. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that we're going to run this for the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to use 5 minutes to round up because I'm going to need a couple of minutes to finish off with, okay?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sounds good.
What do you think of this political race with Ted Cruz and Trump wanting to expel 11 million Hispanics, many of whom who have American citizens as their children, and their children would then be homeless? And what do you think of Ben Carson and his idea that China's in Syria and how he said blacks are lazy and all this other activity? What do you think?
I think Ben Carson is in it for the money that's coming from the book. He never expected to get elected as president. He's doing it for money and speaking engagements and things of that nature. There's an old hillbilly saying that around here that we don't think Ben Carson has walking around sense. In other words, he's an educated idiot. He got book learning. He knows how to do brain surgery and stuff like that. But when it comes to common sense issues, he don't have a leg to stand on. And as far as Trump goes, Trump is a false flag, is what Trump is. There's no way that you can deport 11 million people from the United States. They pointed towards Ike did it. What Ike did was actually hurt humanity as a whole. He just rounded people up, and some of them were American citizens. We start this about immigration. Let me ask you this question. You're a legal professor. You know a lot about legalities and stuff. How many Americans could produce papers to prove that they're a legal immigrant?
Well, first of all, how many Americans, by the Republican standard, can produce a birth certificate to prove we were born in America when the President of the United States can't do it? I mean, if the Republicans refuse to accept President Obama's Honolulu birth certificate of 1961, what makes them think they're going to believe a hillbilly's birth certificate from Harlan County, Kentucky?
Exactly. I mean,
so you can't prove it.
You can't, and he's going to be deporting. If he's going to deport 11 million, who he claims is illegal immigrants, he's going to end up deporting about 120 million who can't prove they have status in the United States either. And this anchor babies issue has been settled under the Supreme Court of the United States. What was it, 30, 40 years ago?
Sure.
When the little Chinese kid was born in America, went outside of America, they expelled the parents. He tried to get back in. They wouldn't let him. And he took it to the Supreme Court, and they said he was born in America, therefore he's an American citizen.
First of all, wait, you've got it before that. The 14th Amendment of the United States, which, as I recall, was passed in 1868, the 14th Amendment is very clear. If you are born in the United States of America, are naturalized, you are an American citizen. The end, over, goodbye, shut the door. This is the Constitution. So what are they talking about? And the reason that was invented is because all these white folks who didn't want black folks voting were saying, well, their mama and daddy were born in Africa, and therefore they're not Americans, and therefore they can't vote even if they're liberated. So the Congress of the United States and the 3/4 of the states said in the 14th Amendment, you're born here, you're an American citizen, and that's the end of it. Now, the way I look at it is, if you're a Mexican and you're born in America, you're an American. And you have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that means having mama and daddy with you. And if that means in America, that means in America. Get over it, Mr. Trump.
Yeah, this is going to the Supreme Court. Texas has refused to issue birth certificates to American-born babies in the Mexican lineage. Now, this is going to go to the Supreme Court. I don't know. It may be 2 or 3 years from now. But if you're born in America, you're American. And Trump is using this to rile up the bloodthirsty right-wing base. Everybody knows it, that is involved in politics. They know it. He just wants to keep them riled up and keep them voting for him. I got an old saying, Trump reminds me of an old dog in heat. That the Tea Party runs to him just like he's an old dog in heat.
Oh, well, let me ask you this, Jed, in all honesty now. If I was looking at you in the face, I'd be winking at you right now. Do you really believe people born in Texas are Americans? To me, that's a foreign country.
Yeah. Well, at one time it did belong to Mexico, didn't it?
Yeah, it was independent. It was an independent state of Texas. I wish it'd go back to that or return as a province of Mexico.
The funny thing is that the one thing that keeps people apart is propaganda. And the one thing that makes people ignorant is a lack of knowledge. And when we really go into the history of who we are and where we come from, we'll actually realize that none of us are any different from each other. We were all created by God in God's image. We all created equal. We all have the equal right to exist on this planet, wherever that may be. And as long as we all sit down and allow people to perpetrate a propaganda in countries and cities and towns and communities around us, we will never come to a place where there is peace in any of our lands and cities. So therefore the answer has to be where we continue to talk about love, where we continue to talk about togetherness, unity, collective communities, and where the family which is not just your brother and your sister, your mother and your father, but your family are normally those that you're raised with, that you grow with, that you went to school with, your extended families, and that we're all at one, no matter what color or race or creed that you come from, and that has to be the continual teaching, and that teaching can only be found in the Word of God. It's the only place it can be found.
Until humanity as a whole can follow two commandments that Jesus gave us: love God and treat thy neighbor as thyself. When we reach that point in humanity, then we'll see what we're talking about.
Here's the funny thing, Jed. I love that portion of Scripture in particular, because it actually says to love thy neighbor as thyself. And the biggest problem is, how can we learn to love our neighbor when we have not yet learned how to love ourselves?
That's a big part of the problem. People need to learn how to love themselves for what they are.
And when we learn to love ourselves appropriately, then we're going to be in a position to know how to love our neighbor.
Yeah, and we won't be pointing fingers at this person or that person or this group of people or that group of people. We'll all be, what a lot of people don't understand, the first church was a socialist church. The first Christian community under Paul was a socialist community. They all shared socialist views. They come together and everybody put everything in the pot, and they gave to each other as was needed, according to my reading of the scriptures.
Yeah.
And we have a divided country that don't believe that don't believe in sharing with the poor, the rich. I've even heard people say the government is not responsible for poor people as far as food stamps and helping people with food stamps or health care. Where in the Bible does it say the government and rich people are exempt from giving charity to the poor people?
It doesn't.
Well, it doesn't matter, because take religion out of it for a moment, and if you read the Constitution of the United States of America, it says that this government is ordained in part to provide for the general welfare of our people. The general welfare includes health, food, clothing, housing, education, security, safety, employment. All these things are included in general welfare. So if you deny that we should provide, when welfare is a horrible negative word among the Republicans, if you deny that we have an obligation to provide for the general welfare of the American, you are stepping on the Constitution of the United States, not to even bring up the fact that you're slapping Jesus and God in the face. I mean, you're slapping these people right in the face with blasphemy. Didn't Jesus say, care for the poor, the sick, the naked, the widow, and the orphan? Didn't he say that?
Absolutely.
Yes, he did.
Well, there you have it. So why don't you ask these Christian, evangelical, racist, Mongolian freaks what they're talking about when they talk about Christianity? They're not talking about Christianity. They're spewing venom from the serpent that invaded the garden that made us mortal.
78% of the Christian evangelicals support the Republican Party and voted Republican. 22% of Christians that didn't vote for him. Now, I am more likely to believe that the 22% had it more right than that 28%, because the Republicans pushed this issue of government not supposed to help the poor, government's not supposed to, health care and all this stuff. So you are what you vote. If you're 78% of the people and you're voting Republican, then you're voting, in my opinion, against Christianity, the Bible, God, and Jesus himself.
Christianity is not the problem. People are the problem. People are the problem.
It's how they interpret it.
Absolutely. People are the problem, and their interpretation of faith and religion. That's the problem. And as long as people are running on their own agenda, which is their self-greed and their self-loathing, and boasting about what they can and what they can't do and what's theirs and what's not theirs.
Jed, did you ever see the movie Mississippi Burning with Gene Hackman?
I saw it.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure did.
Do you remember? And this goes to Kervin's excellent remark and inquiry about why this racism is so fundamental in the heart of the white racist. I will never forget, as long as I live, Gene Hackman sitting in the car with that FBI young fellow, and he said, my father had a neighbor, and he was a black man, and that black man got a mule. My father was too poor to have a mule. So one night he went down there, and that mule showed up dead. And the FBI man said, well, why did he do that? He said, because and he used the N-word, no Negro, but he used the other one, no Negro is going to have a mule before a white man. And that is at the crux of the matter. They must make inferior the black man to make their own pathetic, poverty-driven, uneducated, non-Christian, non-religious, God-hating lives have meaning. They have to have something below them. And animals are no longer sufficient. So they turn a human being with a heart and a soul, with flesh, who cries like us.
But that very mentality, that very behavior, that very attitude makes them less human.
Yes, but they don't see it that way.
But I do.
But when you can take a black man and two Jewish boys who came to Mississippi, Philadelphia, Mississippi, to help register people to vote, which is their constitutional right, and then you shoot them dead, you torture them, and you bury them under a mud pit, those people don't have hearts and souls. Those people are the worst creatures ever put upon the earth. They're no better than the Nazis who shot my family in Auschwitz. No different.
They don't have a conscience, and they don't have compassion. That's
well,
for sure.
They beat their own wives. Remember that policeman beat up his wife? Remember that? Put her in the hospital.
We're gonna round this up in the next 2 to 3 minutes, gentlemen. So I'm gonna start with you, Hillbilly Jed. In 1.5 minutes, round up the Kentucky view of police brutality, racial hatred, and the issues that need to be looked at and focused on from your perspective.
In Kentucky, what we need to look at is the welfare of Kentuckians. We need to stop voting on emotion, and we need to see what is going to help, our fellow man. That is the most helpful thing that could bring Kentucky about. And as far as police brutality, like I said, it's not reached the outlying regions here. It has reached the cities, because we had a girl died, a little teenage girl died by murder. Cop murdered her. I think opening people's eyes, social media is probably the best that a lot of us can do. And I say, hit the social media, make your points known, be an activist.
Okay, well, Jed, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. We really look forward to meeting and catching up with you again in the very near future. Your first performance has been absolutely awesome, and we look forward to sharing this platform with you again, where we catch up with you on another occasion. Dr. David Remade, 1 minute, round it up.
Jed, it's such a pleasure to be with you and to know that in the darkness of the South, that there is a voice that reaches out to the world and says, we can be a better people. We can love justice. We can pursue truth. We can be humble before our fellow man, no matter how poor or how disadvantaged he is in the world. We need more people like you. We know that it's not easy for you. You have neighbors, you have family. God help you at your Thanksgiving dinner when you have all those Republicans over. But we know that what you're doing is right. And we know that your voice is contradicting that silence, which buries us all in a darkness from which we shall never, ever escape unless we believe in one God and that we are all in his image made. Thank you, sir, and it was an honor and privilege to be on this show with you.
I want to thank, I'd like to thank Kervin and Dr. David, and I'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to get down here and express my opinion. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Kervin.
Thank you very much, guys. And I just want to thank you both for a very, very educational, informative, and fantastic show on Issues Today once again. And I'm cutting it short because I promised Linda that I was going to play this track before we finished. I hope you do like a bit of reggae, because we were talking about Christopher Columbus and the fact that he didn't discover America. And we have a very prolific reggae track, which really, by Burning Spear, which speaks of Columbus and the fact that he is a liar. And this is how I'm going to finish the show today, in honor of you, Hillbilly Jed, and as a special request and dedication to our producer, Linda. I just want to thank you both for joining the show, and I just can't wait till we meet up sometime again. And David, me and you will meet up again next Saturday when we're going to have Black Lives Matter on the show. But as for you, Jed, it has been an honor and a privilege, and I wish you all the best for anything that you might be doing, and we look forward to meeting you again. Thank you very much, and we're out of here.
World Jam Global Radio, this is Clarity. This is Clarity.
Mix up, a whole heap of bed up, and happy straighten out. Christopher Columbus is a jam blasted lion. Christopher Columbus is a jam blasted
World Jam Global Radio, this is Clarity.
From